Once more, we follow the family who would do anything for a quiet life. The first film in the franchise picked up with the aftermath of an alien attack that saw several super-sensitive creatures combing the landscape looking for prey. The blind aliens had highly adept hearing that meant they hunted on sound, and we watched as the Abbotts hid out at their farmhouse whilst the monsters operated in the area. It was very eerie, and that's probably the worst pun I've ever said, so if you leave, I don't even blame you. However, if you're still here, time codes will be linked below in case you want to skip ahead to a certain talking point. Now Evelyn, played by Emily Blunt, ended up giving birth, and Lee sacrificed himself so that his children could survive. The movie culminated with Evelyn and her daughter Reagan realizing that there was a way to defeat the creatures, and them getting this method out is very much the plot of this film. Now being labelled part 2 kinda signifies the aesthetic of the movie, and this film actually ties heavily in with the first entry. There's flashbacks which set up key events in it, and even a moment where Lee walks past a rocket ship toy. This was in the introduction of the prior film, and his youngest son ended up activating it, which led to his death. Now whilst the opening of the film doesn't explain everything about the monsters, we do learn that they came from a comet which passed over the Earth. For lack of a better word, the invasion was extremely fast and happened without warning or any time for the government to prepare for what was coming. Everything was over in a matter of days, and why I was hesitant to use the word invasion is because the creatures don't really have any agenda or goals. They're simply monsters that by sheer dumb luck ended up on our planet and are now the top of the food chain. Anyway, it's an incredible way to open the movie, and I absolutely love when films do one-shot scenes, and this one is no exception. It's visceral and keeps your heart racing as we see the nightmare that was brought to Earth. They should have went with the tagline, "On Earth, no one can hear you scream," hey? But I digress. Now from here, the movie flashes forward just over a year and picks up immediately after the events of the first part. Evelyn has just cocked that shotgun and she's ready to chew some bubblegum and kick some ass. Now you might remember that at the end of the last film, the sound of the shotgun alerted several aliens in the area and they started rushing towards the house. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a continuity error as that isn't acknowledged, and instead the family are able to leave the property pretty easily. With their newborn baby and children Reagan and Marcus, they set out across the land to bring people a message of hope that will allow us to regain control of the planet and go back to destroying it ourselves. Yay! Now the first movie was very much about the family learning to adapt to this new world, and the follow-up film is about them learning to adapt to no longer having Lee around. He of course taught them several things, and they discovered key survival tactics on their own that they're now using to go out into the world with. The movie very much ends with the children stepping forward on their own 2 feet and destroying the monsters themselves, embodying both their parents. Before departing, Reagan also did something similar to her father and lit up a fire which caused one across the landscape to be lit up too. In the film, they head to this location, which we discover is the home of Emmett, played by Cillian Murphy. Emmett was a friend of the family, and in the opening of the film, he and his children attended a kids' baseball game that Marcus was playing at. After Marcus sets off a bear trap, he ends up saving the family, and we learn that he's lived at this location for several months. Unfortunately, his children were killed by the monsters, and his dying wife ended up succumbing to a disease. Later on, Marcus stumbles across her body, and it turns out that he cut himself off from humanity after seeing how vicious people could be. However, he sees the family, namely Reagan, as a beacon of hope. Now when discussing the character, Cillian said that he feels Emmett is a metaphor for the world right now, and that he views him as someone who has given up. However, Reagan represents someone who comes along and allows you to believe in yourself and something greater. This sets up the second act of the film, which centers around Reagan going off on her own. In Emmett's bunker, the family discover that the song Beyond the Sea is being played on a constant loop, and this sound originates from a nearby island. Now this song carries a lot of meaning with it, as not only does it indicate where there is sanctuary, but it also offers the idea of a better life. The song was originally sung by Jack Lawrence, but it's been covered by several people, most notably Bobby Darin, whose version we hear in the movie. It's about a man who says somewhere beyond the sea that his lover is waiting for him, and the piece has been used in several films. Typically, it's put in place to indicate that there are happier times somewhere else, which the island represents as no aliens occupy it. We discover that the aliens are unable to swim, and thus, after they came to the planet, the National Guard moved as many people as they could to this location. Since then, they've been living relatively normal lives, sitting about watching Tiger King all day. Unaware of this, Reagan simply wants to travel to the location and use the radio tower to transmit a frequency that's harmful to the creatures, and she ventures out there by herself. Evelyn sends Emmett out to bring her back, but after he discovers her plan, he decides to aid her. Now along the way they search for a boat and run into feral humans who look like I did in the middle of lockdown. Back at the base, Evelyn ends up venturing out to the pharmacy from the start of both movies in order to get her baby oxygen. She also goes to her child's grave and places her wedding ring there. At this point, Marcus stumbles across what I believe is Emmett's wife's corpse, and he has to hide out with the baby in the furnace as the pair slowly start to suffocate. It's heart-pounding stuff with him, Evelyn and the baby, and it's equally as terrifying on the other side. Watching Emmett have bottles tied around him by the creepy humans made me hold in a fart so that I wouldn't alert anyone in the cinema or on the screen. It's lines like that in my reviews why Rotten Tomatoes won't approve me, but you know what? I'm happy to die on that hill. Emmett and Reagan discover the monsters can't swim after he makes as much noise as possible to draw them in order to kill the humans. After diving into the water, one drowns but another remains on a boat at a dock, which comes into play later. They take a boat and arrive at the island, which is where they meet Damon Honzu's character, who's simply referred to on IMDb as Man on Island. The other boat with one of the aliens on it drifts into shore and it starts mercilessly killing people, which makes Honzu, Reagan and Emmett rush to the radio tower. Man on Island becomes Man on Floor and he's killed by one of the aliens as it stalks them into the location. It's a very tense scene, but Reagan manages to make it to the studio. Here she plays the hearing device over the mic and this sends the signal out to everyone. Back at Emmett, Marcus is able to weaponize the signal to use it on the monster outside, and finally the family is safe. Now because of this signal transmitting through the radio on loop, everyone has a weapon that they can use to fight the creatures with. The first movie was very much about the Abbotts finding a way to do this, but now they've passed on this knowledge to those that are able to listen. I believe that the next film will center around getting the rest of the family stationed at this outpost, and from here they'll formulate a plan to take down the monsters once and for all. Now it should be said that both the first and second film end in ways that mean you can draw your own conclusions and close the book on the franchise should you wish for it. However, Emily Blunt in an interview with Collider said that there was potential for a sequel and that the door to A Quiet Place Trilogy was definitely open. The movie was actually screened for people pre-pandemic, and the press carried out interviews that discussed the film in general and what could be happening next. Blunt stated that Krasinski had several ideas for the future of the franchise, and if you cast your mind back to November last year, then you may remember that a spin-off movie was announced. The Hollywood Reporter stated that Krasinski was working with Jeff Nichols, who you might know for his work on Alien Nation and Midnight Special. Nichols and Krasinski are currently putting together the script for the piece, and when discussing the project, the latter said he had a unique idea that he was really excited about. What's interesting is that he said most spin-offs involve taking one key character from something and dropping them into a different project. However, A Quiet Place was very much about the world around the humans. He said that this meant you could pick and choose any person and put them into this world and that it would still feel connected. So I'm expecting something that's the polar opposite to the setup of these films, and instead of seeing things from a farm family, I'd love to get the POV of someone either in the government or military. In the movie, it's mentioned that Emmett has a brother at a base, so I think that seeing things through his eyes would be a really cool place to start. There's also a scene in which Reagan walks past some high heels at a train station. I would love to see this scene play out, and it just shows the kind of adventures that they could go on, and how they could just show things from different people's perspectives. I think most likely though that it will be based around someone with authority and power, and how they had that all stripped away and had to fend for themselves. Probably a bit of a tired subject, but it just shows how much the Quiet Place universe can explore and tackle certain things. I think from the way things are going that we can expect to see the spin-off within the next 2 years, and then hopefully the third installment in the trilogy right after that. There's a lot to look forward to, and before we get into my overall thoughts on the movie, I just thought I'd let you know that we're giving away 3 free copies of the Godzilla vs. Kong collection. All you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the film. The winners of last month's competition are on screen right now, and we'll be announcing the winners for this one on the 30th of May, so make sure you get commenting. Now as for my thoughts on the film, again, this was another brilliant piece of cinema that I really enjoyed. Both parts are fantastic pieces of horror, and my cinema was so quiet throughout that you could hear a pin drop. Yes, that's because there was only about 3 people allowed in it, but it's still such a captivating movie, and the sound design is once more outstanding. There's so much atmosphere to it, and I love that you can pretty much shotgun these movies back to back. There were some showings of it that played the first movie beforehand, and though I watched it at home to prepare for the new one, I kinda wish I'd seen them back to back in that environment. However, I do know that the storming of the house doesn't really lead to anything, but that's a bit of a nitpick. I think the movie is really well acted, it's very tense, and it does so much by doing so little. I think that the next time though, they really need to ramp the stakes up and give the family a definitive ending instead of just leaving it slightly open-ended like the last 2, but you know, it's part 3, so we probably will get that. Now, I'm not sure which out of the 2 that I prefer yet, but the fact that that's a difficult choice shows how good this one is. The first movie was very much about home life, whereas this follow-up is about a country decimated, and they work really well as companion pieces. Overall, A Quiet Place 2 was great, and it secures a 9 out of 10.